Clay, did you have anything to share about why do so many leaders think hiring more people often equals more progress?
When you said that, Harley, I immediately thought of a story way back at the beginning of my career. The first real job I had, I was hired by a retired Marine colonel who was running and growing a business. And he talked about how in the military, they'd estimate that a particular project was going to take 200 man hours. And then the general would look at him and say, great, get me 200 men over here. I'll see you in an hour.
Appreciate everyone joining us today. So this is the June edition of our Executive Edge live panel. I'm Harley Green, founder and CEO of Workagenics, where we help executives and leadership teams stay focused on high impact activities by delegating the rest to highly skilled AI leveraged ultimate executive assistants. I am thrilled to moderate the conversation today with these powerhouse leaders who know firsthand what it means to hire, not just for headcount, but for real strategic impact. So today on the panel, we have Clay Posey, who is the CEO and founder of ClearBox Strategies. Clay has over 30 years of data-driven growth strategy and scalable team building behind him. We've also got Susan Fennema here, who's CEO and founder of Beyond the Chaos, an ops expert helping owners escape the weeds with strategic support hires and planning. And then we have Mike Slinker, who's the CEO of Tennessee Memories and founder of Slinker Consulting, a visionary leader who builds value-driven teams across industry. And we have one more leader joining us. Jason will introduce when he gets here. So welcome, everyone. Really appreciate you sharing your time with us today. The first question I have to kind of go around the table and get your ideas, starting out with myth busting. Why do so many leaders think hiring more people equals more progress? Maybe we'll start with you, Susan.
I think a lot of times they don't know how to solve the problem. They know they have too much to do. There's a lot of overwhelm. They're maybe freaking out a little bit. How are we going to get all this done? And their only way that they know to solve it is, well, let's bring more people. It'll help solve it. But they're not looking at the overhead that causes the interpersonal challenges that causes, as well as if you have more people to throw at something, it doesn't necessarily solve the problem, depending on what the problem is.
Yeah, I love that insight. Mike, jump in with you. Any insights on why leaders think hiring more people
in today's society, and even before, probably take the stance of more people equivalates to more getting done. But what you kind of look at from the tactical responsibilities, you forget the fact that really where the rubber hits the road is where the vision meets that tactical responsibility. And that's where your workers are implementers versus those that are visionary.
Very nice. And last but certainly not least, Clay, do you have anything to share about why do so many leaders think hiring more people often equals more progress?
Well, it's when you said that, Harley, I immediately thought of a story way back at the beginning of my career. The first real job I had, I was hired by a retired Marine colonel who was running and growing a business. And he talked about how in the military, they'd estimate that a particular project was going to take 200 man hours. And then the general would look at him and say, great, get me 200 men over here. I'll see you in an hour. And the fallacy in that is that every additional person you bring on the team or you put on a project is going to be 100% effective or 100% efficient. And the truth is they're just not. And so we delude ourselves thinking that, oh, well, if I have 200 people, it only takes an hour, when really there's diminishing returns with every additional pair of hands that you put on a project.
Absolutely. There's that management overhead, training, all those things add in. And great point there. Well, guys, we have the final panelist has been able to join us here, Jason Rosado, founder of Distinctive Coaching for Business Success. Welcome, Jason. He helps coaching service firms to scale their revenue with lean, empowered teams. Jason, we were just talking about some myth busting about why do so many leaders think hiring more people often equals more progress. Do you have any insights to share on that question?
Why hiring more people means more progress.
Yeah, the myth people often think.
Yeah, right. Because people want to be able to duplicate themselves. So they feel, if they can bring some other people in, whether it's at their level or under, that they can get more work done.
So this is more of a kind of a storytelling question. I'm interested in hearing your experience from the panel. Maybe you could each share a story where a single key hire, whether it was very entry level or all the way up to like a COO, created a real turning point in your business.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
so thanks for the question.
Mike.
When you're looking at strategic hires and what is going to move the needle of hiring certain leaders, I'm going to go into from a pastoral perspective. I was able to give an opportunity to serve as executive pastor for one of the largest, fastest growing churches in the Nashville, Tennessee market. What I found was that the pastor had vision. He had all of the things in line with growing the church, but specifically he needed someone to actually implement and execute the vision. So the turning point was specifically looking at policies and procedures that the directors of every ministry within the church actually had. And this goes to nonprofits, your church, it goes to companies as well. When you can take a visionary, whether it would be the founder, the CEO of a company, and they can actually focus on their vision, you've got to have those key people specifically related to those that can implement, because that is a piece where if your tactical responsibilities is outrunning your vision, it's time to hire. The turning point whenever you take a visionary leader that actually is seeing, 5 miles down the road or 30,000 feet high, you're going to have those 500 feet level implementers to actually set out for your vision, whether that be in a nonprofit, your church specifically, or even your consulting firm. You're looking to see if your specific vision is being outpaced and outrun by your tactical responsibilities that you have every day. And once you know that that is outpacing your vision, then you're going to have to reset and repivot, specifically related to, we're going to have to get the right person involved to actually establish some momentum in executing the vision that you currently set. That is a key component of moving the needle where you need it to be versus having tactical responsibilities that have to be done and managed, because there's a difference between a manager and a leader. Specifically, a lot of folks don't recognize that there are management responsibilities that you have to do as a leader, but there's a total difference between a leader and a manager.
And that's a great distinction. Thank you for bringing that up. Susan, do you have anything you want to share on this one? A story about when a key hire created a turning point in your business or some people you've worked with?
Sure. I can speak to my own business. About 4 or 5 years ago, I have to look it up, I hired a part-time virtual assistant. She was amazing. And today, she is my director of operations, my right-hand person, full-time, my only full-time employee, and probably will be the person that my business will be handed down to in the long run. Spending time with her over the years and developing her has been a joy for me. But what's awesome is when you can bring in somebody like that and you can see the brilliance right away and you can see the path and you're able to push them along that path. None of this is a secret to her. So if she's hearing this, she'll say, yep, we've already talked about that. But then, seeing their investment in your culture, their commitment to the values of the company, and that they're almost a reflection of you is really, really it's a powerful, humbling thing. And so finding the right people matters more than anything. Because I've also had other virtual assistants. They are not her.
They are not all created equal.
Right.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm sure that that feeling of peace and knowing you have someone that you can trust in that position is just
Completely.
huge. Jason, how about you? Was there a story you can share about a single key hire that created a turning point in your business or a business of someone you help?
Yeah, there's a lot. So it's interesting with business, and the way I work with my clients is always, as the owner, you want to focus on making your role, the things that you absolutely love doing, you would do all the time. They energize you, they lift you up. You're really good at them. You get a great return on investment, your time investment and your energy investment. And as such, in past positions in small business and in corporate, I've hired and developed hundreds of people. And in my own business, and again, I work out with my clients, it's like you do whatever you want. So with me, I run very lean. It's just me and outsourced support. That said, those were really key. But what I really wanted to talk about in this answer is one of my clients, Andrew, who owns a web design and development firm. And he was working like 70 hours a week. He was pulling some all days, all nights, trying to get work out. He had a team of 20 contracted designers and developers, but he wasn't fully delegating to them. He didn't fully trust them. They would be late on assignment. There would be errors in their work. He would have to look over and make corrections. And he was like, certain things, it's just way faster for me to do it, even if it means I don't have a life and I can't see my family. So he was doing all that, and his business was really just hanging on by a thread, even though he had built out this team, this organization. So when we worked together, what we did was we took a look at his organizational structure. And again, Andrew, do you really want to be focused on day in, day out? What are the things that you love doing that are going to drive the business forward? And what do you want other people to do? So we got him to stop doing all the other stuff and really start delegating more. And once we did that, we also, again, so going back to the question about the key hire, we saw that he really wanted to hire a project manager who could act as a general manager so that this person could interface between him and the team and him and clients. So he didn't have to take every question all the time from both sides and just get bombarded. So we worked on that and we did that. And he hired this really wonderful woman to step in as project manager. Basically, she was, like I said, the operational general manager, where then he was freed up to focus on business development, the tech projects that he really loved working on the most, where his passions were. And just by doing that, making that change, bringing her in, getting her up to speed. And it was a very quick process. I'd say we did that in like 3 months, and we worked together for 6 months overall. And in that time, he grew his business, his overall revenue by 105%. So more than doubled it. And he cut his work hours in half from 70 down to 35. So when I think of a key person who can really change something around fast, that's always who comes to mind for me.
Absolutely. And I appreciate how you mentioned the timeline, because a lot of times people, especially if they haven't had that experience of having a kind of a key hire, they really don't know how long it should take. And they might have some misguided expectations of, I'm going to hire this like COO, and in 20 days, I'm not going to have to work anymore. They're going to just handle everything. And that's really not realistic. I mean, even from low-level admin hires to the high-level COOs, it's that 3-month onboarding. Like I like to do 30, 60, 90 plans. Those are super helpful, both for the hire and for you as a manager or leader, making sure you kind of know how to start handing things off. So appreciate that point you made. And Clay, I'm sure you've got a story when a single key hire has created a big turning point in business.
I've always got a story. I could just say what Jason said, or I could just say what Susan said, because I think there's a very common theme here. For me, and this goes back to the very first company that I founded, but even with ClearBox today, is hiring that key operations administrator, whether you call them a COO or head of operations or general administrator, general manager, having that person to tend to, with ClearBox, I had all the technicians, I've got engineers, I've got designers, I've got all kinds of people to interface with clients at a hands-on work level, but being willing to say, okay, I'm going to actually hire what essentially is an overhead position, which is always a big risk for an owner, is I'm going to hire a manager. I'm going to put a layer of management in place. That's a big call. Doing that back at the first part of this year freed up my bandwidth to focus on business development, which is what I love and what I do best. And the net result of that, even though she's still in a learning phase somewhat, having come on in January, but we have already booked as much revenue this year as we did last year. Wow. And I'm just coming up on the close of Q2. So huge impact.
Love that. Well, this kind of relates to the previous question. It's talking about when you are starting to scale your support team, where do you start? Do you start with operations? Do you start with the admin work? Do you start in leadership, sales? What's your opinion on that, Susan?
I have pretty strong opinions on that. I believe the owner should get out of the operations as soon as possible. So as soon as you can set it up so that everything gets, made or delivered or, whatever your deliverable is, a widget or a project, and stay out of that and have people run that, the more you can focus on the important parts. And as a small business owner, especially, that usually is sales. To Clay's point, no one's better at selling to us than us. You can train that later, but I believe you have to be quite a bit larger to be able to bring in that sales group. I think it's the last thing an owner should give up. I also believe in outsourcing marketing pretty early, as soon as you can afford it. And I would hire a fractional outsource team to do that. And the same with your ops. You don't have to hire a $250,000 a year COO, right? You can hire, shameless plug here, you could hire a group like us that comes in and can work at any level in the ops area fractionally and inexpensively, or you can hire part-time overseas people that can help you as well. I have one colleague who does that beautifully. All of her team is overseas. She has to do probably a little bit more managing because of that, but it allows her to execute all of her work with very low overhead. So that's really my thing, is get out of that ops area, stay with the finances, stay with the sales, have a hand in marketing, but get out of ops.
Awesome. For the other panelists, anyone have a slightly different opinion or want to add something that's different than what Susan already shared? Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, thanks. And I think that was a very good answer, Susan. And I think everyone, all of us, we're different types of coaches and consultants, and we all bring something different to the table, a different perspective, different process. And as long as it works for our clients, hey, that's the most important thing. The way I do it with my clients is sort of what I started to mention before. Where should the owner be? Wherever the heck they want. Whatever brings them the most passion, the most enjoyment. And to me, it's like, if that's being cabin boy, grabbing a mop and a bucket, there's a way to do it. I tell my clients that there's no wrong answer. It's a puzzle, and you can put the pieces together any way you want. There's no one way to do a business. The only thing is that make sure you're putting your energy where you're the most effective, because there's always somebody for the things that you don't love doing and you don't get the best return. There's always somebody else who can do it better, faster, and cheaper than you can. And it's important to leverage that and realize, where do you fit the best? So when I start with my clients, we, actually make them create their own perfect position posting as if they were going to hire themselves. And we start with that. Like, what's your title that's really inspiring? What's your, income? What are your tasks? What background and experience do you need if you're going to hire yourself into this position? And then what are the position duties? And the other things, just when you're going through a good hiring process, what are the cultural fit they're looking for, personality traits, everything? Their business is the person. It starts with the person. Everything else flows outward. So to me, in the way I look at it, and the way I work with my clients, is you have to start there. And yeah, they shouldn't be doing everything. They should outsource. They should hire. They have to get out of their own way.
Yeah, I love that
Jason,
approach.
Your point, sorry to interrupt, but Jason, to your point, which I love, by the way, I agree with you that you have to do the things that bring you joy. But if you are, and you did not say this, so I'm not arguing this point with you, but if you are doing all the things, you don't really have a business. You're just kind of a freelancer. So if you're establishing a business, especially if you're looking down the road of selling or transitioning it and not just shutting it down, you have to think about making sure that it can run without you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's an excellent point.
You have to ask the question too, who is going to bring the most value to the function that you need? If you can put that value tag on there, whether that be your joy that you want to do, or, similar to what Jason mentioned, there's here's the step process. They're wanting to kind of do a profile here. If you were interviewing yourself, what that looked like, you got to put a value to it. If you don't put a value to it, you're just kind of running in the wind.
Exactly.
The other piece I throw in there, Harley, is as you're scaling, is you delegate, you don't abdicate. And there's a big difference between the two. Regardless of whether you're the cabin boy or the captain, I think it falls on the shoulders of the founder or the owner to create the company culture and the expectations. At ClearBox, we've been at this for 10 years now, which is kind of hard for me to believe, but there's very definitely a culture of excellence there and a culture of accomplish the mission. And whether it's a fractional person overseas or it's somebody that's full-time, U.S. based, the idea is if we commit to do something, it's not a question, we're never going to go back to a client and say we can't do that. We may have to say we're going to do it a different way, but that's a culture that's been created over time and it's crafted, and it's just because it's one of my core values is you've got to be able to do that, and then you've got to have measurements in place to make sure that whatever the culture is, whatever the vision is you're casting, is actually being put out there in the marketplace on a day-to-day basis.
Awesome. Every day, your top performers are buried under emails, scheduling, and reporting. Work that doesn't move the needle. The result? Frustration, burnout, and worst of all, lost revenue. That's why we created the Executive's Guide to Scaling High Performers, a simple, battle-tested framework to eliminate busy work and unlock your team's full potential. Inside, you'll get the exact steps top executives use to retain A players, boost productivity, and free up their team for high-impact work. Stop losing revenue. Go to workergenics.com/growthhub or check the episode notes to download the Executive's Guide to Scaling High Performers now. I think that falls very nicely into the next topic that I wanted to mention. Running a business is not easy. There's challenges, and so I want to talk about hiring fails. One of the biggest mistakes many leaders make is expecting a new hire to be a miracle worker, and without giving them any kind of clear guidance, systems, or support. Why does this happen so often, and how do you avoid it? Maybe we'll start right back with you, Clay.
Well, it goes back to a book that was foundational for me when I was building my first company. I started my first company in 1993, and I just happened to pick up at the bookstore, real live terrestrial bookstore, not Amazon, a book called The E-Myth by Michael Gerber. And that has been foundational to every company I've built since, and companies where I've gone in and helped other folks build their business. But that's that as a technical expert, you somehow are then qualified to run a business. And, the plumber who opens a plumbing company or the hairdresser who opens a salon. Part of being able to have a successful hire is having clear systems, clear expectations, roles and responsibilities, and going through the discipline of writing that down so that you have clarity on what the expectations are. And so they have clarity, so they know what job they're saying yes to. And I've learned that the hard way. I've had those epic fails where I hired somebody and patted them on the head and said, go forth and prosper. And it's been an epic fail for them, for me, for our customers, but it's because we didn't define those expectations on the front end.
Open it up to the rest of the panel. Anything else you guys want to share on this question? Hiring fails?
Yeah, I'll chime in exact. It's just adding to what's already been said. One of the things I coach my clients through is what I call a two-way interview process. And what that means, and I see most leaders who I've worked with in the corporate world and small business owners don't do this, or they don't do it well enough. And what it is a candidate is in a job interview. They're basically putting themselves in a sales role. They're trying to get an offer. That's their objective. If you really like the candidate, which hopefully you do because you brought them in for an in-person interview or at least a video interview or something, then you might be also in that sales position trying to get this person because you want someone good and you're sitting there talking with them. So you have two people a lot of times trying to sell each other, and nobody's being a critical buyer and saying, well, wait a second, why might this not work? So the two-way interview process is where the hiring manager or business owner facilitates the other side as well, because they might be unskilled with interviewing. They might be nervous. They might, again, just be really looking to get that offer and trying to give all the right answers. So saying things to help that person disqualify themselves, but more importantly, what was just said, to help them, if they do get the offer, to go back and go, well, wait a second, is this really going to be a good match? Should I accept it? And so that means asking them questions like, if our roles were reversed and you were interviewing somebody for this position, what would be the most important thing you would ask them? And see what they say, which gauges their communication style, their ability, their thought process, what they see of the position. It gauges so many different things in addition to what they think is important. And then I just turn around and ask them that same question and see what their answer is. And also things like, if there were any reason that this wouldn't work for you, what might that be? Things like that, getting people to really think about, why might this not be a good match? You can even ask that outright, like, why might this not be a good match? And put those hard questions out there, and don't worry about feeling like you're being standoffish or rude or making people feel uncomfortable. Yeah, you are a little bit, but that's okay. That's part of the interview also. See how they are if they're a little uncomfortable. So I think that's super important, and most people don't do that. And they just, do you have the background that I need and the skills? Yes. Can you fulfill these responsibilities? Yes. Do we like each other? Yes. Will you accept this pay? Yes. Great. When do you start? And you really need to go deeper than that, because that's how you end up with people who don't fit. Months later, you're going, how come this person won't listen to what I'm telling them to do?
I'll kind of add to that. Interviewing is an art. It's a skill. And I'm going to be honest with you. If you own a business and you don't have that art, skill of interviewing, I would highly encourage you. That might be your first hire, whether it's a 1099 or a W-2. Because in essence, if you don't know how to interview, and this is a very deep subject, because it goes into behavioral interviewing, the different styles of interview, how to actually know to ask the right questions. It's an art that if you own a business and you have to do a hiring and you don't have that skill, that's the very first thing that I would consult that person to do. You need to find somebody that can actually hire someone, because that's a skill you don't have.
Well, I agree with everyone, especially like Clay's, the systems, the processes, all that. You have to have it or no one can succeed. But the other thing I think business owners often do is they hire someone they know. My sister, my mom, my brother-in-law, and then you can't fire them. And sometimes they might need to be fired, or sometimes you outgrow them. So I'm always cautious to warn people, don't bring in anybody that you can't also ease out. And it doesn't have to be a harsh ease out, but you don't want to break up your family over it either. So just be very careful about how you're handling that and go in eyes open. And if you have to do that, or if you do think it's the absolute right person because your daughter just graduated with a marketing degree, make sure that you're starting with how you're going to end. Talk about that up front, almost like a premarital
Prenup.
contract. A prenup, exactly.
Yeah, that business prenup. Awesome. Well, speaking of the fails and now, how we avoid them, what is one thing you guys do now before making any key hires that you wish you had done earlier in your business? Susan, you want to jump right in with this one?
One of the things I always make sure of is that I know exactly what they're going to do. And I run a bunch of numbers. And sometimes you're still wrong. I made that mistake last year. I wanted someone really badly, and I ran the numbers and I projected it and I figured it out. And our income didn't match up. And unfortunately, we had to part ways over that. Our revenue just wasn't there to support that big salary. I learned a lot from that. And I think that that's important, that you take that into consideration, is what's going to happen if your projections don't play out. If that person isn't going to make the money that you expect them to make, how ready are you to deal with the other side of that too?
Anybody else want to jump in on this one? What's one thing you do now that you wish you had done earlier?
Well, I think one thing that I do too, this is the flip side of what Susan is saying, is I try to have a very candid discussion with that employee about not what their pay expectations are, but what their needs are. I expect them to look at their budget and say, okay, you're hiring me in this position for X amount of money, and X is going to cover all of my expenses, because people will take a job because they're desperate. And to Jason's point earlier, they're selling themselves, so they're putting their best face on. But if they're $500 short every month, then they can't give you their best because they're trying to figure out where that other $500 is going to come from. So I want to make sure not only is it a fit on our side, that whatever the value of that position is, that they're going to equal or exceed the value of what it's costing me. Is I want to make sure that I'm paying them enough that they can live on that. Sometimes that means I have to adjust what the reality of the marketplace is for what I need to pay. Sometimes it's just not a good fit. That they have a lifestyle that exceeds what that position will pay.
Clay, isn't that a Dave Ramsey thing? Doesn't he, in his interview process, doesn't he have people actually submit their personal budgets with the pay? I think that's a thing.
I'm not a Dave Ramsey guy so much,
Okay.
so I'm probably not qualified to answer that. But
I'm not a huge follower, but I thought that was part of his process.
I don't ask them to submit the budget for me, but I make them look at it for themselves. I moved from being a manager and a leader to a meddler if I'm asking them to give me their budget. But I need them to know that, okay, you can live on this. This is going to make you happy. It's going to make your spouse happy. It's going to make the bank happy when you pay your mortgage every month.
Yep. Here's an idea to kind of just, when you look at different approaches to do that. Here's something that I've done that has proven to be successful is pay for performance agreements. It keeps both parties intact. It keeps the integrity by which the value I've hired you on, as well as the value by which they're going to discipline themselves to render services that are being hired for. I think it keeps both parties aligned. It also keeps that carrot dangled in front of them in a way where it's advantageous and benefits both sides. So it's not just one-sided for success. So pay for performance agreements have worked very well for me.
Oh, that's great. I love having making sure everyone's interests are aligned in that way.
I was just going to mention real quick on that submit a budget idea. And Clay said he doesn't ask them, so that's good. I think that's good. But I was wondering if somebody did do that, if you might be going into some legal trouble waters there. I don't know. That just,
Yeah,
how much are you spending on Starbucks every month?
Well, because you can't discriminate, based on certain things. And somehow, I don't know, it kind of put up a little worry about, well, what can you ask and what can you not? Is there a line somewhere? Maybe not. I don't know. But anyway, that's another thing to think about during the hiring process too, is things that you can ask, things that you can't ask.
And that's I think what you're getting at there, Jason, is exactly why I don't ask them. I don't want to know your line item budget. I don't want to know how much you spend on beer every month. That's just not my business, as long as it doesn't impact your performance at work. But I do know if somebody takes a job where they're underpaid, they're setting themselves up for failure. They won't be able to give you their best because they've got something else. At some point, they're going to come to resent you, if nothing else.
I agree.
Yeah.
I've never understood how he kind of gets away with that, except I guess maybe because of it is a personal finance business. I don't know. I would not do it either.
Well, it seems like we've got some consensus on that one. One thing that I have done is help people to make budgets, because a lot of times, especially when you're in that entry level space, they may not have a budget. And so that can be something that you can do after they're hired to help them make that salary that they're receiving go further and have them be comfortable and, like Clay said, not resent you because they're feeling empowered with their budget then. So good points bringing that up. I think we're running short on time. So the last question I wanted to touch on with everybody is, what are some of the signals you look for to tell you that it's time to hire versus just getting like temporary kind of one-off contractors, like the Fiverr type things, or using technology to automate? When do you make that decision that having someone come in part-time or full-time is the thing to do to help the business grow? Jason, you want to start off with this one for us?
Sure. Yeah. It's a multi-tiered thing. And for me, it's, again, when I'm working with clients, what we do is say, well, where are you now? Where would you love to be a year from now? And then we create, like we said before, so I like to work backwards. So, if this were going to be with your organizational structure, with what that looks like, with your revenue, with your offerings, price model, work schedule, family life, vacation, like all, we go through all of that. Where are you going to be a year from now on all those? Then on each of those, where are you 6 months from now? And each of those, where are you 3 months from now? So it's like, when do you hire? Well, you look at the map, say, oh, this is it. But that said, it's not that easy, of course, right? Things are going to change. You have to be flexible, but that's the starting point. And then from there, it's like, how stressed am I? First, do I have capacity to take on? We talked a little bit before, is it the chicken or the egg? Sometimes people feel like they need revenue in order to hire somebody. They feel like they can't get revenue until they hire somebody. So again, that's a tough thing. And you can talk, I tell my clients to talk with their accountant and go through some of the cash flow scenarios for different things. A big part of what we work on is, so one thing, and I didn't do like a real introduction for myself, but yeah, I'm a business coach. I'm also a certified energy healing master. And so I help my clients to release subconscious internal emotional blocks that stop them from making really great decisions and taking their best actions. And that's one of them that we tend to process through and figure out. Because when you clear out the fears, which is, most emotional things that are blocks are fears. When you clear those out, what you're left with is higher intuition, higher inspiration, higher creativity. So those things, your knowing goes up. So we work on that. We say, okay, based on the plan, based on where we're at, based on what you're doing, based on your revenue, what makes sense, what feels good, when would you like to bring someone in? What are the fears around that? Let's clear those. Now, are those fears still there after they're cleared? And then talk to an accountant, your accountant or somebody in-house if you have that, whatever it is. So we want to look at it from a bunch of different sides, from skill-based, organizational-based, financial-based, and emotion-based.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason. Anybody else want to jump in on this one? What signals do you look for to tell you it's time to hire?
I'm kind of a last resort person, right? So have you already thought through, can I automate it? Can I use technology to do it? If you're going to hire someone, can you hire part-time to start? Maybe somebody you want to start part-time and move to full-time so that you can ease them in, because people are most expensive overhead, honestly, in pretty much anything we're doing. And there's also a whole bunch of other things that go with people, right? People make drama. Technology usually doesn't. Sometimes it can. I know, Mike, you're having a little technology drama this morning, but usually is, at least rational. So I look at, how do you push it off as long as you can until you need someone? Maybe you need someone to build the automations, but that doesn't have to be a full-time hire. So I always look at it that way, kind of a last resort, add the person.
Yeah, I'll kind of add to that. So when you look at a company, first and foremost, I'll kind of share a brief testimony with this as well. So when you start a company, so I started working for a major company, the world's largest OTC drug in the United States, Narcan. That actually went through my hands after the FDA approved that drug in the United States. It was up to me to send that drug out and commercialize that drug. When you look at companies I've built, from consulting firms as well as destination venues from across the world, the very first thing you have to look at is the foundation of your company. And that is, what is the culture of your company? Defining the culture of your company also looks at the people. Specifically, when you look around the table in the boardroom, when you look around the table in the office, when you look at the war room in the sales office, you look to see, what is the rubber bands in every department? Are they stretched to the max? Because if they're stretched to the max, the next step in that rubber band is breaking. Then that's a true tell sign of it's time to hire. Now, probably would be seen as a last resort, so you don't want to get to that point. So you want to get to the point where you've identified a culture by which the best way and approach that your staff works, whether it's a Fortune 500 company, whether it's a small local business, or if it's something so greater that you're dealing with the FDA because of highly regulated markets, right? you still have to identify that culture. And within that culture, you can see and feel the pressure by which, and we use the rubber band model. That rubber band to say, whenever I go into that department, is what does that rubber band look like? Does it have margin? You've got to build margin in your business, whether that margin in your time, your space to visionary, your space to handle tactical responsibilities. If you don't build margin in your business or in your personal life, you're going to see yourself stretch to a way where you can't grow your business.
Yeah, I like that margin and that rubber band analogy. One thing, I was in a company once and overtime was really like not pushed as in a pushy way, but just really clearly made available. And so that way that company had that built-in margin where those who wanted overtime, they could do that. And so they were able to have a buffer so that if times were leaner, the first thing you take away is overtime. So you have some margin there and a little more breathing room before you have to make the next hire, or that worst case that kind of Susan was talking about happened, was having to let someone go. So great points on that.
The only thing I'd stack on top of that, I look at data, forecasting data. I'm looking at what I see coming down the pipeline. I'm looking at our sales forecasts. I'm looking at jobs that are in the pipeline. Typically, our clients are a 90-day sales cycle, and I know my numbers, so I know what my percentages are, and I'm forecasting demand of I'm going to need a new employee by the end of August. I'm going to need an additional project manager or whatever it is. Then I'm going to hire that person early because I want to get them in, get them acclimated. I don't want my rubber band to be stretched to the max before I put them in place because I need that time for them to ramp up without feeling a lot of pressure, so that then when that additional work does come in, but that's having slack in the budget and some margin in the system to be able to carry that person until they can then ramp up to 100% productivity.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hear it all the time when people come to us to get an executive assistant that they should have done it 6 months ago because now they are so busy. They're working weekends. They're not having any time with their families. Maybe just before that rubber band is stretched completely to the max is a good time to start thinking about that. I'm so grateful for all of you sharing your time and your wisdom with us today. I kind of want to go around one final time and give you an opportunity to just share a great way for people to connect with you. If they want to continue the conversation or learn more about your services specifically, what's a good way for them to stay in touch? And we'll start at the top with Mike.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for the opportunity to actually join this podcast, and looking forward to many days ahead. If you want to reach me, you can call my cell phone directly.
Thank you, Mike. Jason.
Yeah, thanks. So again, business coach, Jason Rosado, Distinctive Coaching for Business Success. And if anyone would like to have a complimentary organizational structure and revenue growth assessment coaching session, I'd be happy to do that. Help you, get that year plan. What's going to be perfect for you? What are the challenges? What do you need to put together to make that happen? And just send me a text, 773-829-1276, and just say assessment.
Thank you. How about you, Clay?
You can find me on the internet. The company is ClearBox Strategies. So that's clearboxstrategies.com. There's a calendar on the website. You can actually just book time on my calendar. You don't have to ask me permission. You can just reach out and put some time on there. We can help you with planning, sales, marketing, growth, automation of processes, and structuring the whole customer-facing side of your business.
And last but certainly not least, Susan.
You can reach me. My company is Beyond the Chaos. We help small business owners get out of the day-to-day of their business ops. And to that end, I will give a free operations audit out. So beyondthechaos.biz/operations-audit. Go there and take the quiz, and I'll give you some free advice.
Awesome. Well, those of you listening, whether it's live or on the podcast later, take advantage of these incredibly generous offers from our panelists today. And again, reach out to us and to them, just give them a thanks if you got value from this episode. And thank you again to our incredible panelists for your wisdom, your stories, the actionable insights you've shared with us today. And everyone who's watching us, thank you for joining us with this powerful conversation. As a special thank you to those who are listening, I'd like to personally offer free access to our masterclass, Delegate to Dominate. I walk through exactly how top leaders are reclaiming 15 to 30 hours a week with the right strategic support. You can watch the masterclass and unlock a special bonus offer just for the panel viewers at workergenics.com/bonus-masterclass. And again, thanks for being with us. We'll see you on the next Executive Edge live session.